The candle flickered in the tent, casting shadows across white paper. Lieutenant Daniel Hewitt gripped a worn pencil, the North African night pressing against canvas walls, heavy with aviation fuel and distant artillery. He wrote, "Dear Margaret, by the time you read this, you'll either be holding our baby or holding this letter alone. Tomorrow, I fly again. Every time I climb into that cockpit, I think, what if I don't come back? What if our child grows up never knowing their father? But then I think about the men down there. Tommy Bradford's daughter is 2. Harold Fisher's son is 17. They have families too. If I can keep them alive, if I can bring them home to their children, maybe that's what being a father means. Even before I hold my own child. I don't know if you'd understand, but I need you to know if something happens, it's because I chose to protect someone else's family. I hope that's the kind of man you'd want raising our son. All my love, Danny." He folded the letter with mechanical precision. The ritual calmed him. 17 letters written since arriving in Tunisia. Never sent a single one. They sat in a metal box under his cot confessions to a woman 7,000 miles away who believed he was braver than he felt. Danny Hewitt was 23 years old, married 8 months. His wife Margaret was 4 months pregnant, a fact that made every mission feel like betrayal. Every time he strapped into his P-47 Thunderbolt, he chose something over her, over them. He wasn't sure anymore if that was courage or cowardice. The tent flap opened. Lieutenant Peter Sullivan entered carrying tin cups of bitter coffee. Pete was 31 combat tours eyes that had seen too much and a smile that pretended they hadn't. "Writing to Margaret again." Pete handed him a cup. "Just thinking on paper. You ever send these?" "No. If I die, she gets the telegram first. If I live, she doesn't need to know how scared I was." Pete sat on the cot across from him. "You know your problem, Hewitt. You think too much. Most guys climb in, fly, come back, drink, sleep, repeat. You're up here calculating probabilities. Maybe that's why I'm still alive. Or why you're going insane." Pete leaned forward. "Margaret's pregnant. You've told me 3 times. You're terrified of dying like your father did, but you're one of the best pilots here because you think. You calculate. You see patterns nobody else sees. Command knows it. That's why they keep you on recon." "Recon," Danny said bitterly. "Observe and report. Don't engage. Staying safe means coming home to Margaret. It also means watching men die while I circle overhead." They finished coffee in silence. Outside engines tested. Men laughed at jokes that weren't funny. Someone played harmonica badly. The soundtrack of war between killing. Pete stood to leave. "Get some sleep. Briefing's 6:30. Pete, if something happens tomorrow, make sure Margaret gets that letter." Pete looked at the folded paper. "Nothing's happening. It's just recon." "Just make sure." Pete pocketed the letter. "You're going to hand it to her yourself when this war is over." After Pete left, Danny lay on his cot. Sleep wouldn't come. Instead, he thought about his father. John Hewitt had been careful, methodical. He taught Danny to fix engines by feel-red weather, by watching clouds calculate distances, by counting seconds. Practical knowledge passed from father to son, but he'd also taught something darker, that hesitation kills. That split second when John Hewitt saw the dog and chose to swerve instead of brake cost him everything. Danny had been 16. He came home to find his mother kneeling beside an overturned tractor screaming. After the funeral, his mother said, "You're the man of the house now." She meant it practically. Feed animals. Fix machinery. But Danny heard be better than your father. Don't hesitate. Except the Army taught the opposite. During flight training after Danny froze for 3 seconds during evasion drill, his instructor screamed, "Hewitt hesitation kills you, freeze in combat, men die." But another instructor, older, said something different. "Don't just react, son. Think fast, but think first. Pilots who live longest aren't quickest. They're the ones who make the right choice in the moment they have." So which was it, think or act? Danny had spent 7 months trying to figure that out. He kept a notebook filled with observations, wind speeds, bombing angles, enemy response times, probability matrices. Other pilots mocked him, called him the professor. But the notebook gave him control over chaos. Tomorrow would be his 43rd mission. Simple reconnaissance. Safe. The kind that let you come home and write another unsent letter. He drifted into fragmented sleep around 0300, dreams of Margaret's face, his father's tractor, a baby crying in darkness, and a voice asking, "What would you sacrifice to save strangers?" He woke at 0545 to Pete shaking his shoulder. The briefing room was converted supply tent with folding chairs and a map. 23 pilots in space for 15. Colonel Marcus Drummond walked in. 54. World War I veteran. Some survivor. "Gentlemen," Drummond pointed at the map. 6 aircraft, P-47's high-altitude recon along Route 14. You're looking for enemy armor supply convoys. The 34th Infantry Regiment is moving through Wadi Akarit Pass. Intelligence says light resistance. Danny studied the map. Wadi Akarit, narrow valley, high ridges, natural choke point. His engineering mind saw it perfect ambush terrain. He raised his hand. "Sir, shouldn't we have air cover over the valley? If they get boxed in, there's no maneuver room." Captain Vincent Cross cut him off. "Intelligence says light resistance, Lieutenant. We're not wasting fuel on what-ifs." Cross was 38, by the book. His brother died at Pearl Harbor when commanders ignored protocols. Ever since, Cross believed rules kept men alive. Drummond looked thoughtful. "Your concern is noted, Lieutenant, but Captain Cross is right. We can't provide air cover for every movement based on terrain analysis. You'll run your recon. If you observe anything that changes the situation, report immediately. Clear." "Clear, sir." The briefing continued with mechanical details, flight formation, radio protocols, weather, expected return time, the logistics of putting men in machines and hoping they come back. After briefing, Danny walked toward the flight line, morning sun heating the desert. A voice called out, "Lieutenant Hewitt, Private Thomas Bradford, 28, radio technician from Alabama." 3 weeks ago, he'd shown Danny a photograph his daughter Ruth, age 2, holding a stuffed rabbit. His wife Evelyn, pregnant. "Just wanted to show you something." Tommy pulled out a new photo. Evelyn's belly noticeably larger. 6 months along. Hoping for a boy this time. We're naming him Daniel, after my dad. He taught me what matters isn't what you do, but what you pass on. The name. The values. Danny felt something twist in his chest. "My wife's 4 months pregnant." Tommy's face lit up. "Congratulations, it changes you. Everything matters more. Every mission I'm thinking I gotta get home. Ruth needs her dad. This new baby needs a dad. You'll see." He clapped Danny's shoulder. "You boys keep an eye on us today. We're moving through rough terrain. Should be quiet, but you know how that goes. We'll watch, I promise." Another voice, older. "Lieutenant Hewitt, Sergeant Harold Fisher, 42, 20 years in the Army." "Sergeant, what can I do for you?" Harold stepped closer, voice low. "You see anything wrong out there today?" Anything that smells like trouble, you call it in loud. Don't wait. That's standard procedure. I know, but I mean loud. Make them listen, because my boy Jimmy just turned 17. Senior year back in Ohio. If this war drags on another year, he's getting drafted. Every day we win faster is one day closer to him not having to fight. These boys in that valley, they're fighting so the next wave doesn't have to. So my Jimmy can graduate, go to college, never know what it's like to watch his friends die. Harold's voice cracked. So you see trouble, you call it. Every life we save is one less telegram, one less kid without a dad. The words hit Danny hard. He thought of his unborn child, Margaret, alone in Nebraska, Tommy's daughter learning to say airplane, Harold's son Jimmy, 17, on the edge of being pulled into this machine. I'll call it Sergeant. If I see anything, I promise. Danny walked to his aircraft. P-47D Thunderbolt, tail number 2258. Iron Horse, painted on the nose. 7 tons of metal and fury. 450 caliber guns. 2,000 pounds of bombs. A survivor's plane. The crew chief approached. She's fueled and armed, Lieutenant. 2,000 pounders under the wings. Try not to bring her back full of holes this time. I'll do my best. Pete was already at his plane. Ready for another day of circling and reporting. Ready as I'll ever be. Try not to think yourself into a crater. We've got poker tonight, and you owe me $20. Danny climbed into the cockpit. Familiar smells. Aviation fuel gun oil, leather sweat. He strapped in checked instruments. His notebook sat in his lap. He opened it and wrote April 9th, 1943, Mission 43, Recon Route 14, Wadi Akarit Pass. Then he calculated valley length 3.2 miles. Infantry speed 2 mph, time to traverse 96 minutes. German armor speed if present 8 mph. Time to intercept 24 minutes. Command response time for air support minimum 15 minutes. Window for extraction, if ambushed, 9 minutes. He stared at the numbers. If Germans hit the convoy in Valley Center and command took 15 minutes to approve support, the infantry would be dead before help arrived. The numbers didn't lie. But intelligence said light resistance. Cross said, don't waste fuel. Drummond said, follow the plan. Danny closed his notebook and started his engine. The radial roared 18 cylinders firing. The aircraft vibrated with restrained power. At 07:42.6, P-47s lifted off. They climbed into formation, Danny flying number 4. Clear sky, perfect visibility, perfect day for reconnaissance, perfect day to follow orders, unless the orders were wrong. Danny looked at his notebook one more time. Those numbers. That 9-minute window. He thought about Tommy Bradford's unborn son, Harold Fisher's 17-year-old in Ohio, Margaret and their baby. He thought about his father hesitating on a hillside. One moment of indecision. And he wondered what happens when the right choice and the safe choice are not the same. The formation climbed to altitude. Danny scanned instruments. Everything normal. Radio chatter minimal. Standard reconnaissance flight. Nothing unusual. But something felt wrong. That pressure in his chest. The way the terrain below looked too perfect for ambush. The way intelligence reports always said light resistance until suddenly they didn't. His hand rested on the throttle, his other hand near the stick. Ready, waiting. At 0800 they reached their patrol corridor. Danny could see the valley below. Wadi Akarit, narrow, deep. The 34th Infantry was moving through it like ants in a groove. At 0814 his radio crackled. Secondary channel. Infantry frequency. Static. Then a voice. Panicked. Contact heavy contact armor on the North Ridge. More voices, overlapping, scared. We're getting boxed in. Multiple tanks. Where's our air support? Then a voice Danny recognized. Tommy Bradford, Alabama drawl now shredded with terror. Anybody out there listening? We're dying down here. They're coming from 3 sides. Where's our air? Danny's heart stopped. His hands tightened on the controls. He switched to primary channel. Captain Morris, squadron leader, was already responding to command. Command, this is Eagle Lead. We have reports of contact in the valley. Requesting instructions. Silence. Then, Eagle Lead, maintain patrol altitude. Command is evaluating. Stand by. Danny looked down. Through breaks in dust, he saw them. German tanks. 14, maybe more. Moving into position. The infantry was trapped. He checked his watch. Began counting. Morris on radio again. Command requesting immediate strike authorization. Friendlies are engaged. Eagle Lead standby. Authorization pending. Maintain altitude. Danny kept counting. 30 seconds. 45 seconds. 1 minute. On the secondary channel, Tommy's voice again breaking. They're rolling in. Oh God. Oh God. Danny looked at his notebook. At those calculations, 9-minute window. Command response time minimum 15 minutes. The math was clear. By the time authorization came through, Tommy Bradford would be dead. Harold Fisher would be writing letters to his 17-year-old son explaining why Dad wasn't coming home. 850 men would die in that valley while Danny circled overhead with 2,000 pounds of bombs and orders to wait. His training said follow orders. His father's death said don't hesitate. His instructors said think first. His conscience said act now. Morris on radio. Allbirds weather deteriorating. Vector west. Return to base. Do not engage. Pete Sullivan's voice. Danny, you copy? We're heading home. Danny didn't answer. He was calculating. Dive angle. Release altitude. Survival odds. Target selection. Wind speed. Distance. Time. 11 seconds from dive to impact. 11 seconds to decide. He thought of Margaret. The letter in Pete's pocket. The baby he'd never hold if this went wrong. He thought of Tommy's daughter Ruth. Harold's son Jimmy. 850 fathers who wouldn't come home. He thought of his own father frozen on a hillside making the wrong choice. And Danny realized there was no safe choice. There was only the right one. He keyed his mic, voice steady. Sullivan, I'm going in. Pete's voice shocked. What, Danny? That's suicide. You heard the order. I heard men dying. They'll court-martial you. Danny looked down at the valley, at the tanks, at the men. Only if I survive. He pushed the stick forward. The P-47 nosed down. Sky became blur. Engine screamed. Altitude indicator spun backwards. Pete's voice in his headset desperate. Danny, pull up, now. But Danny was already committed, already falling, already past the point of return. Warning klaxons blared. Overspeed, structural stress, black flak bursts appeared around him. The Germans had seen him, were tracking him. He didn't care. Below, Tommy Bradford looked up, saw the plane diving like a falling star. One plane, one pilot, coming to save them or die trying. Danny's hands were steady, his breathing calm, his mind clear. He had 11 seconds. And in those 11 seconds, he would either become a hero or a cautionary tale. Either way, he'd made his choice. The right one. The only one that mattered. What happened in those 11 seconds would be analyzed by military tacticians for decades. But in the moment, there was no analysis. Only instinct training and the brutal mathematics of survival. The world became noise and speed and narrowing focus. Danny's hands moved with practiced precision muscle memory, taking over where conscious thought would be too slow. He extended dive brakes. The P-47 shuddered violently as airflow caught the metal panel's bleeding speed from 450 miles per hour down to 420. Still too fast, but manageable. Barely. At 5,000 feet, he had his first clear view of the battlefield. The German column stretched along the valley floor like a steel snake. 14 tanks. He counted them quickly, his engineer's mind cataloging details even as his body fought G-forces and turbulence. Panzer IVs mostly. Long barrels. Seasoned crews. And at the front, commanding the formation, one tank with a distinctive long antenna. Command vehicle. His first instinct was to aim for that lead tank. Cut off the head. Standard doctrine. But something his father had taught him years ago, standing in their Nebraska garage with a broken tractor between them, whispered in his memory. You want to stop a convoy. Danny, you don't block the front. They just push through or go around. You break the spine. Middle vehicle, blocks both directions, traps the whole line. Danny adjusted his aim point. Not the lead tank. Tank number 3. Positioned at the narrowest point of the valley where the ridge walls squeezed closest together. At 3,000 feet, the flak started in earnest. Black puffs blossomed around him like deadly flowers. One burst exploded 30 feet to his left. The shock wave slammed his aircraft sideways. Another burst below and behind. They were bracketing him, walking their fire and getting the range. His left wing took shrapnel. Red warning lights flashed across his instrument panel. Aileron damage. Hydraulic pressure dropping. The stick felt mushy in his hands. Sluggish. The aircraft wanted to roll left. He compensated with right pressure, fighting the controls, fighting physics, fighting death that reached up from below with explosive fingers. Pete's voice in his headset, no longer angry, but terrified. Danny, you're hit. Break off. Break off. Danny didn't respond. Couldn't. Every ounce of concentration focused on the dive on the target growing larger in his windscreen, on the calculations running through his head. Dive angle 70 degrees. Release altitude 900 feet. Time to impact 2.3 seconds. Survival odds if he pulled out at minimum altitude, maybe 40%. But survival odds for Tommy Bradford and 850 men if Danny didn't drop these bombs, 0. The math was clear. At 2,000 feet, Danny noticed something else. Smoke from German artillery positions on the ridge was blowing southeast. Wind speed approximately 15 knots. The bombing manual said to ignore wind under 15 knots for dive bombing. But the manual was written for level bombing approaches, not 70-degree dives. At this angle, wind drift mattered. A lot. Danny made a tiny adjustment, rolled the aircraft 6 degrees right, just enough to compensate for wind pushing his bombs left after release. It was a guess. Educated, but still a guess. No time for precise calculations. Just feel. Instinct. The kind of knowledge his father had possessed, the ability to sense what machinery would do before it did it. At 1,500 feet, his gloved finger moved to the bomb release button. The 2,000-pound bombs under his wings were armed. M65 general purpose. Delay fuse set for 0.1 seconds. Just enough time to penetrate armor before detonating. If he hit the tank, if the wind calculation was right, if the Germans didn't shoot him down in the next 3 seconds. Too many ifs, but no choice. Never had been. At 1,000 feet, the German tank crews saw him clearly now. Machine guns on the turrets traversed, tracking his dive. Tracers reached up like slow-motion fireflies. Most passed behind him. He was diving too fast, too steep. Hard to lead. But one burst found metal. Rounds hammered into his right wing. Fuel leak. He could see it streaming behind a silver mist in the sunlight. Not catastrophic. Not yet. But if a tracer hit that fuel stream, he'd be a fireball before he even released. 920 feet. Danny mashed the release button. Thunk. Thunk. 2 heavy bombs dropped away. The aircraft lurched upward as 2,000 pounds of weight vanished, suddenly buoyant, wanting to float. But Danny was already hauling back on the stick, pulling with both hands, straining against G-forces that crushed him down into his seat. 7 Gs 8. His vision grayed at the edges, peripheral sight collapsing into tunnel vision, focused straight ahead. Blood drained from his head, pooling in his legs. He grunted, tightening his core muscles, forcing blood back up, fighting to stay conscious. The altimeter unwound like a broken clock. 600 feet. 400. 200. Ground rushing up. Details visible now. Individual rocks. Scrub brush. A German soldier looking up, mouth open. 150 feet. The P-47 leveled out. Danny's vision cleared. He was alive. Flying. Impossibly alive. Behind him, 2 seconds had passed since bomb release. 2.1 seconds. Impact. The explosion was biblical. A flash of white light so bright it painted shadows on the inside of Danny's cockpit. Then orange. Then red. A fireball that expanded upward like a miniature sun being born. The shock wave caught Danny's aircraft from behind, slammed it forward. He fought the controls as the plane bucked and rolled, metal screaming, rivets groaning. For a moment, he thought the tail would tear off. But P-47s were built tough, built to take punishment. The aircraft held together. He climbed, gaining altitude, distance, getting out of small arms range. Only then did he look back. What he saw stopped his breath. Tank number 3 had vanished. Where a 40-ton Panzer IV had been rolling forward 3 seconds ago, there was a crater. Flames. Twisted metal. But that wasn't what made Danny stare. The explosion had been bigger than it should have been. Much bigger. Tank number 3 must have been carrying extra ammunition. The secondary explosion from cooking off ordnance had created a blast radius 3 times normal. The tank directly in front had been flipped onto its side like a child's toy, 40 tons of steel overturned by the shockwave. Its crew was climbing out, disoriented, one man's uniform on fire. The tank behind was burning, penetrated by shrapnel fuel ignited. Black smoke poured from every hatch. No one emerged, and the tank behind that one was trying to reverse tracks, churning sand, but boxed in by fire and smoke and wreckage. The commander stood in his turret hatch, waving his arms, shouting orders that couldn't be heard over the chaos. Inside the lead tank, Hauptmann Friedrich Keller stared back at the destruction through his periscope. He'd been a tank commander for 3 years, fought in Poland, France, Russia. He knew armor tactics, knew doctrine, knew how battles flowed. This made no sense. One plane, one bomb run. His entire column paralyzed. Either the Americans had sent a suicide pilot or their command structure had changed. Either way, it was effective. Terrifyingly effective. He grabbed his radio. All units disperse. Get off this road. Now. But half his column couldn't move. Blocked by burning vehicles. The ambush they'd set for American infantry had become a trap for themselves. The entire German column had stopped, frozen, trapped by burning vehicles ahead and behind. Infantry was scattering, abandoning the half-tracks, running for cover in the rocks. Officers shouted orders that nobody could hear over the roar of flames and cooking ammunition. From the ground, Tommy Bradford's voice on the radio shaking with something between terror and joy. Whoever that was, you just saved us. Thank you. Oh God, thank you. Danny didn't respond. His hands were shaking now. Adrenaline crash starting. He looked at his fuel gauge. The leak was worse than he thought. Fuel dropping fast. He had maybe 20 minutes of flight time. The Lepti airfield was 19 miles away. He'd make it, probably. His engine coughed, oil pressure dropping, temperature rising. The shrapnel damage was worse than it looked. Something internal was failing. A line cut. A pump damaged. The 18-cylinder radial was slowly dying. Pete's voice. Danny, Jesus Christ, you're alive. You crazy son of a... Your plane's smoking. How bad? Danny checked his instruments. All the news was bad. Bad enough. I'm heading home. Engine won't last long. I'm on your wing. I'll stay with you. No, get the others back. I can make it. Danny, don't be stupid. I'm not leaving you. And Pete didn't. He pulled his P-47 alongside, close enough that Danny could see his face through the canopy. Pete's expression was tight, worried, but he wasn't leaving. The flight back was the longest 19 miles of Danny's life. Every second the engine sounded worse. The knock became a hammer blow. Oil pressure dropped from 60 psi to 40, to 30, to 20. At 15 psi, the engine would seize, would lock up solid, and he'd glide, maybe make the field, maybe crash in the desert and hope someone found him before he cooked in the heat. The minutes crawled. Danny talked to his plane like it was alive, like his father had taught him to talk to machines. Come on, girl, just a little farther. You can do this. I know you're hurt. I know you're tired, but we're almost home. Just hold together a little longer. The engine coughed again. Rough. Missing cylinders now. Running on 12 cylinders instead of 18. Then 10. The smooth roar becoming an uneven rattle. Temperature 240 degrees. 250, 260. At 270, something would fail catastrophically. Pistons would melt. Cylinder walls would crack. The engine would eat itself from the inside. Danny throttled back. Reduced power. Every bit of stress he could reduce, every degree of temperature he could save, might be the difference between landing and crashing. Thalepte Airfield appeared on the horizon. Brown runway against brown desert. The most beautiful sight Danny had ever seen. He keyed his radio. Tower, this is Lieutenant Hewitt. Emergency landing. Engine failure. Fuel leak. Coming in hot. The tower controller's voice was professionally calm. Roger, Hewitt. Runway is clear. Foam crew standing by. Wind is calm. You're cleared to land. Danny set up his approach, but his flaps wouldn't extend. Hydraulic failure. Landing without flaps meant higher speed, longer rollout, less control. His gear came down. At least that worked. 3 green lights. Locked. 1 mile out. Half mile. The runway growing in his windscreen. His engine made a sound like a dying animal. A shriek of metal on metal. Seizing. Finally giving up. 300 feet altitude. The engine locked solid. Propellers stopped. Sudden silence except for wind noise. Now he was gliding. No power. One chance to get this right. He aimed for the runway threshold. Too high and he'd overshoot. Too low and he'd hit short cartwheel die in a ball of fire and aviation fuel. His airspeed was bleeding off. 140 miles per hour. Too fast for a normal landing, but he had no flaps to slow down. He'd have to ride it in hot and hope the runway was long enough. 50 feet, 30, 20. The runway rushed up. Danny pulled back slightly, flared, tried to grease it in. The wheels touched, hard. The aircraft bounced, slammed back down. Nose gear compressed violently. Something cracked, but the gear held. Danny stood on the brakes. Maximum pressure. The P-47 shuddered tires, smoking brakes, screaming. He could smell burning rubber even through his oxygen mask. The end of the runway was coming up fast. Beyond it, rough desert. If he ran off the end at this speed, the gear would collapse and the plane would tumble, and he'd die within sight of safety. Slower, slower. The brakes glowing red hot now. 50 yards from the end of the runway, the P-47 stopped. Danny sat in the cockpit, hands still gripping the stick, unable to move. He'd made it. Impossibly, he'd made it. The foam crew arrived, spraying his engine, his fuel leak, everything in white chemical foam. The fire risk was over. Pete's P-47 landed behind him. Normal landing. Easy. Like coming home from a Sunday flight. Ground crew ran up with ladders. Danny unstrapped with fingers that didn't want to work. Climbed out. His legs gave out the moment his feet hit the tarmac. Pete caught him. Easy, Danny. I got you. Did it work? Are they okay? I don't know yet, but you hit something down there. The whole German column stopped. Danny nodded, then bent over and vomited. Adrenaline crash. Delayed fear. Everything he'd suppressed for the last 30 minutes coming out at once. When he could stand again, he saw Captain Vincent Cross walking toward him. Cross's face was carved from stone. Unreadable. Lieutenant Hewitt, you're confined to quarters pending investigation. You will not speak to anyone. You will not leave your tent. Is that understood? Yes, sir. You disobeyed a direct order. Yes, sir. You broke formation without authorization. Yes, sir. You could have died. Danny looked at Cross, saw something in the older man's eyes. Not quite anger. Something else. Yes, sir. I know. Cross stepped closer, lowered his voice so only Danny could hear. My brother died at Pearl Harbor because people didn't follow protocols. Because commanders played golf instead of reading radar reports. I've spent this entire war believing that rules keep men alive. He paused. But today, you broke every rule. And 850 men are alive because of it. I don't know what to do with that. Sir, I didn't do it to be rebellious. I did it because the rules didn't fit the moment. I know. Cross's voice was quiet, almost sad. That's what scares me. Go to your tent, Lieutenant. Colonel Drummond will decide what happens next. Danny walked toward his quarters. Other pilots watched him pass. Some nodded. Some looked away. Nobody spoke. In his tent, he sat on his cot. The adrenaline was gone now. Just exhaustion remained. Bone deep. Soul deep. He'd saved them. Tommy Bradford, Harold Fisher's son, got to keep his father a little longer. 850 men would go home eventually instead of dying in a Tunisian valley. But he'd also killed German tank crews, maybe 20 men, maybe 30. Men with families, wives, children. Men who were fighting for their country just like he was fighting for his. Were they the enemy? Yes. Did they need to die? The math said yes, but that didn't make it feel any less like murder. Danny lay down, closed his eyes, tried to sleep, but every time he did, he saw that flash of light, that fireball, that moment when he'd chosen which men would live and which would die. And he wondered what had that choice cost him. Not his career, that was probably over. Not his life, he'd survived. But something else, something harder to name, some piece of innocence, some belief that war had clean answers and right choices. He'd done the right thing. He knew that. But right didn't feel clean. It felt heavy, like a weight he'd carry forever. Outside, the sun climbed higher. The heat built. And in his tent, Lieutenant Daniel Hewitt lay alone with the memory of 11 seconds that changed everything. Tomorrow he'd face judgment. Court-martial, maybe. Commendation, maybe. He didn't know which, didn't care. Today, 850 men were alive. That would have to be enough. Even if it wasn't, morning came with judgment, as it always does after moments that change the course of war. The question wasn't whether Danny had broken the rules. Everyone knew he had. The question was whether breaking them had been worth the cost. Danny woke to someone shaking his shoulder. The corporal looked nervous. "Lieutenant Hewitt, Colonel Drummond wants to see you. Now." Danny sat up. His body ached everywhere, muscles stiff from G-forces and tension. When he stood, his knees nearly buckled. "What time is it?" "Oh, 700, sir." Danny splashed cold water on his face, looked at himself in a small mirror. Same face, same eyes, but something behind them had changed. He walked across the airfield. Other pilots watched him pass. Some nodded. Others looked away. Nobody knew yet if he was hero or criminal. Colonel Drummond's office was converted supply building. Wooden desk, metal chairs, maps on walls. Drummond sat reading a report. Captain Cross stood to one side. Captain Morris on the other. Major Reeves from intelligence completed the group. A tribunal or a ceremony? Danny couldn't tell which. "Lieutenant Hewitt reporting as ordered, sir." Drummond looked up. His face was unreadable. "Sit down, Lieutenant." Danny sat. The metal chair was cold despite the heat outside. Drummond set down the report. "Do you know what this is?" "No, sir." "This is a field report from Lieutenant Colonel James Pritchard, commanding officer of the 34th Infantry Regiment. He describes yesterday's engagement in Wadi Akarit Pass. Would you like me to read it to you?" "If you wish, sir." Drummond picked up the paper. His voice was flat professional. "At 1400 hours on April 9th, my regiment was engaged by German armor consisting of approximately 14 tanks supported by infantry and artillery. We were in a valley with limited egress points. German forces had positioned themselves to create a kill zone. We requested air support through standard channels. Authorization was pending. Estimated time to arrival 18 to 20 minutes. We did not have 18 minutes. He paused. At 14:21 hours, a single American aircraft later identified as a P-47 Thunderbolt conducted an unauthorized dive bombing attack on the German column. The attack destroyed or disabled at least 5 enemy vehicles and created sufficient disruption to halt their advance. This action allowed my regiment to reposition to defensive terrain and hold until reinforcements arrived. Casualties 19, wounded 5, killed in action. Without the unauthorized airstrike, estimated casualties would have exceeded 200 killed, 300 wounded, with possible complete loss of the regiment. Drummond set down the paper. Lieutenant Colonel Pritchard specifically requests identification of the pilot for commendation. He says, and I quote, that pilot saved 850 American lives. The room was silent. Captain Cross spoke first. "Colonel, regardless of outcome, Lieutenant Hewitt violated multiple regulations. He disobeyed a direct order to return to base. He broke formation. He engaged without authorization. These are not minor infractions. If we overlook them, we set a precedent that any pilot can freelance based on personal judgment." Drummond nodded slowly. "Captain Cross makes a valid point. The chain of command exists for a reason. Without it, we have chaos." Danny remained silent. There was nothing to say. Everything Cross said was true. Major Reeves cleared his throat. "Sir, if I may, intelligence has reviewed the timeline. Lieutenant Hewitt radioed for strike authorization at 14:14 hours. Command response came at 14:32 hours, 18 minutes. By the time authorization was granted, German tanks had already withdrawn due to the unauthorized strike. Had Lieutenant Hewitt waited for authorization, the 34th Infantry would have been overrun. "So, you're saying he was right to disobey?" Cross's voice was sharp. "I'm saying the situation changed faster than command structure could respond. That's not a criticism of command. It's a reality of combat." Captain Morris spoke up. "Sir, I led that flight. I gave the order to return to base. Lieutenant Hewitt broke my direct order. But I've reviewed the tactical situation. He had visual confirmation of armor when we didn't. He had radio contact with infantry when we didn't. He calculated response times that proved accurate. He didn't act recklessly. He acted on information we lacked." Cross turned to Morris. "Are you defending insubordination?" "I'm saying there's a difference between disobedience and tactical initiative." "There's no difference. Orders are orders." Drummond raised his hand. Silence fell immediately. "Gentlemen, I've heard enough debate. This is my decision to make." He turned to Danny. "Lieutenant Hewitt, stand up." Danny stood. "Tell me why you did it. And I want the truth. Not what you think I want to hear. The truth." Danny took a breath. "Sir, I calculated the response time. Command would take minimum 15 minutes to authorize a strike. Infantry had maybe 9 minutes before they were overrun. The math didn't work. Someone had to act. I was the only one in position. So you decided command was wrong?" "No, sir. I decided command didn't have the information I had. They were making the best decision with what they knew. But I knew more. I could see the tanks. I could hear the infantry. I could do the math." "And you decided that gave you the right to disobey orders?" Danny met Drummond's eyes. "No, sir. It gave me the responsibility to act. Right or not, I don't know. But necessary. Yes." Drummond stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "Sit down." Danny sat. Drummond stood, walked to the window, looked out at the airfield. "Gentlemen, I fought at the Somme in 1916. First day of battle, we lost 19,000 men. 19,000. In one day. You know why? Because commanders followed the plan. The plan said, advance across open ground. The plan said, German defenses would be destroyed by artillery. The plan was wrong. But nobody deviated from it. And 19,000 men died following a bad plan." He turned back to face them. "I made a promise to myself that day. If I ever commanded men, I would value judgment over obedience, because obedience to a bad plan kills just as surely as disobedience to a good one." Cross started to speak. Drummond cut him off. "Captain Cross, your brother died because commanders failed to think, failed to adapt, failed to use the information they had. I understand why you believe in protocols. Protocols would have saved your brother, but protocols would have killed 850 men yesterday." He walked back to his desk. "Here's what's going to happen. Lieutenant Hewitt, you are officially reprimanded for breaking formation and engaging without authorization. This reprimand will be placed in your service record. You are also grounded for 72 hours. Danny nodded. "Fair enough. However," Drummond's voice hardened, "you are also being recommended for the Silver Star for valor in combat. Your actions saved American lives. That matters more than protocol." Cross's face darkened. "Sir, you can't reward insubordination." "I'm not rewarding insubordination. I'm recognizing effective combat action. There's a difference. Drummond looked at Danny. But understand this, Lieutenant. What you did was an exception, not a precedent. You had specific information that justified specific action. That won't be true in most situations. If every pilot decides when to ignore orders, we will have chaos and men will die. Do you understand? Yes, sir. You got lucky. The situation justified your choice. Next time, it might not. Next pilot who tries this might bomb friendly forces by mistake, might waste ordnance on the wrong target, might die for nothing. You understand that weight. Danny thought of the German tank crews, the men he'd killed. Yes, sir. I understand. Good. Dismissed. Report back in 72 hours. Danny stood, saluted, and left. Outside, Pete was waiting. Well, court-martial or medal, both apparently. Pete laughed. That sounds about right. You violated every rule and saved 800 lives. Command doesn't know whether to shoot you or promote you. They settled on a reprimand and a silver star. Jesus, only you could get punished and rewarded for the same action. They walked toward the mess tent. Other pilots watched them pass. Some called out congratulations. Others said nothing. The camp was divided. Some saw a hero. Others saw a dangerous example. Inside the mess tent, Danny got coffee. Sat down. His hands were still shaking slightly. Delayed stress response. His body finally processing what his mind had suppressed.
Pete sat across from him. You okay?
I don't know. I keep seeing it. The explosion. The tanks burning. Men dying. They were the enemy. They were still men. Pete was quiet for a moment. Yeah, they were. Danny sipped his coffee. It tasted like ash. I killed maybe 30 people yesterday. Saved 850. The math says I did good. So why doesn't it feel good? Because you're not a psychopath. Killing should bother you. If it doesn't, something's wrong with you. Does it bother you? Pete looked at his own coffee. Every time. Every single time. But then I think about the alternative. If I don't kill them, they kill us. Oh, it's not a good choice. But it's the only choice. A voice behind them. Lieutenant Hewitt. They turned. It was Tommy Bradford, the radio technician from Alabama. His uniform was dirty, his face drawn, but he was alive. Tommy, you made it back. Because of you. Tommy's voice cracked. Sir, I was down there. I heard you on the radio. Heard you break formation. Heard you dive. I saw that explosion. Saw those tanks stop. We were dead men. Dead. And then you. He couldn't finish. Danny stood. You would have done the same. No, sir, I wouldn't have. Because I'm not that brave. Or that crazy. Or whatever it was that made you do it. Tommy pulled out a photograph. The same one he'd shown Danny before the mission. His wife. His daughter. Ruth turned 2 last week. My wife's 6 months pregnant. That baby's gonna be born with a father because you didn't wait for permission. He held out his hand. Danny shook it. Tommy's grip was tight. Desperate. We're naming him Daniel. Boy or girl. Doesn't matter. That kid's gonna carry your name. And when they ask why, I'm gonna tell them because a man I barely knew decided my life was worth risking his own. Tommy left. Danny sat back down. His hands were shaking harder now. Pete watched him. Still think the math is wrong. Danny shook his head. The math is right. That's what makes it hard. I know I did the right thing. But right doesn't feel clean. It feels heavy. Yeah. Pete's voice was soft. That's the weight. The weight of choosing who lives and who dies. Most people never carry that. We do. Every mission, every trigger pull, every bomb drop. We carry it. How do you live with it? You don't. You just carry it and hope it means something. Over the next 3 days, Danny stayed in his tent. The grounding order meant no flying. Just waiting, thinking, remembering. Letters started arriving, not for him, about him. Sergeant Harold Fisher wrote to Colonel Drummond, "My son Jimmy is 17. Because of Lieutenant Hewitt, his father is coming home. That boy won't have to be drafted now. War's turning. We're winning. Jimmy gets to graduate. Go to college. Live. Thank you." Lieutenant Colonel Pritchard wrote to 8th Air Force Command, "Request formal commendation for unidentified pilot who conducted unauthorized strike on April 9th. Action was tactically sound, strategically significant, and saved regimental combat effectiveness. Recommend this engagement be studied for future tactical doctrine development." Even a German report intercepted by intelligence mentioned the engagement. American air tactics appear to have shifted. Individual aircraft conducting independent strikes without formation support suggests decentralized command authority. Recommend revised defensive protocols to counter increased tactical flexibility. The Germans thought it was policy. It wasn't. It was one pilot making one choice. But that choice had rippled outward. Now German commanders were changing their tactics, spreading out their armor, avoiding narrow valleys, assuming American pilots had freedom to engage. It was working. American casualties in subsequent engagements dropped. German effectiveness decreased. All because they'd adapted to a threat that didn't actually exist as policy. Just as one exception. On the evening of the 3rd day, Pete brought Danny his flight gear. "Grounding's over. You're back on the roster tomorrow." "What's the mission?" "Escort duty. B-17 bombers hitting rail yards. Strictly by the book. No freelancing." Danny nodded. "Good. I've had enough improvisation for a while." But that night, Danny couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about what Drummond had said. About the Somme. About 19,000 men dying because nobody broke the rules. And he thought about what Cross had said. About protocols saving lives. About his brother dying because people didn't follow them. Both were right. That was the problem. Rules saved lives. Breaking rules saved lives. The answer wasn't one or the other. It was knowing which moment required which choice. And that knowledge came with terrible weight, because every choice meant someone lived and someone died. Every calculation, every decision. Tommy Bradford's baby would be named Daniel. But somewhere in Germany, a woman was receiving news that her husband died in a burning tank in Tunisia. Both were true, both mattered, and Danny had to carry both. He finally fell asleep around 0300, dreamed of explosions, of falling, of faces he'd never seen but knew were dead because of him. He woke at 0530, got dressed, walked to the flight line. His P-47 was there, repaired, patched, ready to fly again. The crew chief had painted something new on the nose. Below Iron Horse was a small tally mark. 1 tank, and below that, in smaller letters, Wadi Akarit, 4-43. Danny stared at it. His first kill. Officially recorded. Officially recognized. Officially celebrated. It felt like a gravestone. Pete walked up beside him. "You ready?" "Yeah, I'm ready." They climbed into their cockpits, started engines. The familiar roar, the vibration, the controlled power waiting to be released. Danny ran through his checklist. Everything normal. Everything routine. just another mission. But nothing would ever be routine again, because now he knew what it felt like to choose, to act, to kill, to save, to carry that weight forever. The formation took off, climbed to altitude, headed toward the target. Danny flew wing position, by the book, no deviations, no improvisation. But in his mind, he was still falling, still diving, still seeing that flash of light, still carrying 11 seconds that changed everything, still wondering if saving 850 lives was worth the cost of 30 deaths. The answer was yes. He knew that, but he hated that it had to be. 3 months later, Danny received a letter from Margaret. She'd given birth, a boy, healthy, beautiful, named Daniel after his father. The letter included a photograph, mother and son, both smiling, both waiting for him to come home. Danny stared at that photograph for a long time. His son, the future he was fighting for. He wrote back, "Dear Margaret, thank you for the photo. Our son is beautiful. Tell him his father is proud. Tell him I'm coming home. All my love, Danny." He actually mailed this one, because now he had something worth carrying the weight for. Danny Hewitt flew 94 more missions, never broke formation again, never disobeyed another order, but he never forgot. 11 seconds above Tunisia that showed courage isn't the absence of fear, but action despite it. 11 seconds that saved 850 lives and cost him a piece of his soul. He carried that weight home, to Margaret, to his son, to the rest of his life. Because that's what it meant to do, right? When rules said wait. That was the price of conscience over command. Not just courage or skill or sacrifice, but the willingness to carry impossible weight. And keep walking anyway. Years later, when Daniel Hewitt Jr. asked his father what war taught him, Danny didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "It taught me that courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about being terrified and doing what's right anyway. It taught me that sometimes the hardest choice is the right one. And it taught me that some weights never get lighter. You just get stronger at carrying them." His son nodded, didn't fully understand. Not yet. But someday he would, because that's what fathers pass on. Not just names and values, but the weight of choices made. The knowledge that doing right often costs everything. And the strength to pay that price anyway. Danny Hewitt died in 1998, age 78. At his funeral, 3 generations gathered. Tommy Bradford's grandson, Harold Fisher's great-granddaughter, and Daniel Hewitt Jr., now 55, with his own son beside him. They didn't speak of medals or commendations. They spoke of a man who, for 11 seconds above Tunisia, chose conscience over command, and carried that choice home, to his family, to his future, to the rest of us. Because some stories aren't about winning wars. They're about winning the war within yourself. And Danny Hewitt won his. Every single day, for 55 years after 11 seconds, changed everything.